Hey,
So
thank you so
greetings,
much.
I am Chaplain Paul Sutter. I'm the Space Force chaplain, and I recently just took this position on the 1st of July, and things that I learned that first week on the job have completely changed. So not completely, but there have been many things that have changed. So what Chaplain Miner mentioned about the most recent news about the Space Force is incorporated as best as possible in this briefing. But previously, I was the Academy Chaplain for the United States Air Force Academy. Served there for 4 years, and I don't know how much of my bio you want me to go into, but I originally hail from Sandusky, Ohio, and so from the great Buckeye State. And as I was conversing with folks earlier, I'm fifth generation Lutheran pastor, ordained in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Of course, over 5 generations, the synods have changed over time. In my history, 1988 was the formation of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So I'm going to leave it at that and let Chaplain Yelton go ahead and introduce himself before we begin the brief.
Okay, thank you, Chaplain Sutter. And thanks all for the warm welcome. And I'm glad to be with you tonight. I can see there's 118 participants. That's a lot of people online right now. So I've been in the Air Force a little over 20 years, and my most recent assignment before this one was the wing chaplain at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. I've been a wing chaplain a couple of times. Now I'm the Space Command chaplain. And over the course of the 20 years, I've been deployed about 6 times, several times to the Middle East, also to the Pacific, and just had probably 5 or 6 assignments, active duty assignments all around the world. And then the Lord and the Air Force brought me here to Colorado Springs to help build the Space Command. And so looking forward to talking to you a little bit more about that. So Chaplain Sutter is going to have some detailed information and some slides, hopefully, that you can see that will sort of lay out the Space Force and the Space Command and our structure and a little bit about the details of what we're about. So thanks, everybody. Good seeing you tonight.
So Chaplain Sutter, do you want to go ahead and start your presentation, sir?
Yes, and you're going to be running the slides?
I am, sir. Stand by as we share the screen.
Okay. Do you want me to turn off video for the slide presentation?
No, you go right ahead and you keep that up. That'll be fine, sir.
Okay. All righty. Well, again, as I mentioned, this is a very exciting time in space. Just as of last August, the creation of the Unified Combatant Command was stood up with the U.S. Space Command. And then in December, with the signing of the National Defense Act, a new Space Force, the new military service was stood up, the 6th military service. And that's the first one in over 73 years. And so on the 20th of December, we saw the formation of the United States Space Force. And it's an exciting time between what you see in the news media, even Netflix series, things like that. And probably just up front, one of the biggest challenges the Space Force is facing right now is the public affairs battle to, in essence, show that this is serious business that our nation is a part of, is partaking and embarking upon with the creation of the Space Force and the U.S. Space Command. But because there's a lot of political sway one way or another, and like I mentioned, the Space Force Netflix series can kind of have a way of turning this endeavor into something more comedic than how it is serious. But I want to begin with a video. So the next slide, as we go to that, is you'll see a video which will kind of show you the importance of space.
Give me a range and grid to the target.
Range is 1,700 meters.
Hey, we're still waiting for the satellites to acquire.
Can I get a status check on all the vehicles over the target region?
Sir, all birds in area are healthy.
We have a good FOM on the GPS. Building grid 42 Tango, Charlie Whiskey, 982-468. Roger. Give me a sensor over the target. Bronco, this is Devil 3. We have eyes on the target area. Currently eyes on 3 Tangos. Requesting ISR to verify HVT.
Alpha 1, Bronco 5-3. Currently, Double 1 requesting to armed overwatch. Request you push to Double 1 at the following grid. 42, Tango, Charlie, Whiskey, 98.
Roger, Bronco, pushing to Double 1, and we'll contact him on yellow 01. Stand by for a full 360. Looking for a positive ID on HVT1. How copy?
Good copy. Standing by.
How's the feed look?
Hey, what's the status of Alpha 1?
I show no interference. RPA Alpha 1.
Good handshake with Alpha 1. Double 3, your Reaper is on station. Call sign Alpha 1. How copy?
Good copy. Call sign Alpha 01. Requesting follow-on cast to our location as well.
Double 3, you have 2 F-16s inbound. TOT is 15 mics. Call sign Hornet 1. Double 3, Bronco 5-3. Be advised, we're showing indications of jamming over the target area.
Bronco, Devil 03, how do you read? Bronco, Devil 03, how do you read? Any station, Devil 03, how do you read?
Okay, so there we experienced with a little bit of the lag in the video on Zoom, the importance of connectivity. And that is something that we cannot have happen when it comes to military operations. So this was a video that depicted satellite operators flying satellites in Colorado Springs, Reaper pilots at Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, a carrier fleet in the Persian Gulf, and soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan operating in perfect coordination because of the assets that we have in space. And so kind of that final question would be, what happens if we no longer have those assets? So if you could go to the next slide.
Okay. Well, all right.
Is the next slide up? I'm not seeing the space
All right.
threats.
Just a moment, sir.
Okay, no worries.
All right.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So what you see at the top of the slide are just a few examples of the threats that we face today, and that could have interrupted our comms on the video that we just saw. And so this leads us to why space power, why a separate service and a combatant command are necessary. So simply put, our society and our way of life are fundamentally dependent on space. And that dependency creates vulnerabilities, and adversaries are stepping up to exploit those vulnerabilities. And this chart is a summary of the threats to our ability to protect and defend our interests in space. And it is a timeline of the aggressive behavior that has led to space being declared a warfighting domain. So again, space has become a contested place. And so, you know, we see starting over from the left, far left, while the first Gulf War is largely considered the first space war, you know, the Cold War era, even before that, was where we saw the first space domain transition into a contested environment. And in 1973, the Soviet Union declared their anti-satellite program operational. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, we see a decrease in space threats until you get to about the mid-2000s. And in 2007, the Chinese tested their own anti-satellite program when they destroyed one of their own defunct weather satellites. And this show of force did two things. It proved that they were pursuing space dominance, demonstrated their capability and willingness to employ kinetic capability to achieve those ends. And later adversary examples of show of force evolved into persistent aggression. So next slide. And so what you see on the left are the persistent Russian encounters in other domains such as land and sea. And on your right, you see what's called the Cosmos event. In 2019, a Russian satellite, Cosmos 2542, began operating in close proximity to one of our key satellites, while exhibiting the behavior of a similar satellite they launched in 2017, which itself released a projectile. So clearly this type of behavior is a concern to us. And so with a history of aggression in air, land, and sea domains, this is not a new chapter in the Russian playbook. However, the uptick in aggression, specifically in the space domain, drove our policymakers to prioritize our space interests and referenced in the 2018 National Security Strategy. Next slide. In building on the 2018 National Defense Strategy, our national leadership further elevated America's space response by publishing a series of documents. Space Policy Directive 4 started the dialogue of what a Space Force might look like in this current administration. And on the 20th of December, as I mentioned, President Trump signed the fiscal year 20 National Defense Agency Act, which established the U.S. Space Force to organize, train, and equip the forces needed to provide freedom of operations in prompt and sustained space operations. But now that we have our functions and duties, let us explore our purpose. Next slide. So the why and the how. You know, the first thing is to preserve freedom of action. Second thing, enable joint lethality and effectiveness. And thirdly, to provide independent options. And those responsibilities then drive our core competencies, or the how, in maintaining space power. These competencies will be broken down and pursued through multiple missions and disciplines. Slide. So again, we take a look at the different missions and disciplines. So we have the space electromagnetic warfare, orbital warfare, space battle management, space access and sustainment, military intelligence, engineering and acquisition, and cyber operations. Those are some of the various disciplines and missions that we have in the Space Force and the Space Command. Next slide. So again, we are in the midst of a transformation that is taking place, and as of recently, as of Monday, where we stood up the field commands and mission deltas. You can see on the left is kind of the typical Air Force structure that you may be familiar with, you know, having the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And then the next echelons, you typically have a MAJCOM, or Major Command, and then the numbered air forces or a center. And then you'd have a wing commander, group commander, and squadron commander. But in space, we have some of the similar top echelons falling under the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of the Air Force. But then you have the Chief of Space Operations. Four-star General Raymond is the Chief of Space Operations. But the Space Force is looking to flatten some of the levels of command, and so they've gone to a field command structure with deltas, mission deltas, and in line with the mission deltas are then what's also called garrisons, which are kind of the support base elements, and then the squadrons. And the intent behind this was to kind of shift the focus of the Delta commander from 80% focused on kind of installation and support and infrastructure, and only 20% on the mission, to reverse that, to where now the commander is focused 80% on mission and operations and only 20% on the support functions. Next slide, please. And again, we are still kind of in the initial operational capability and have not achieved full operational capability. But once that takes place, we have full operational capability, it will include 3 field commands. And so starting under the Chief of Space Operations, starting to the far left, there is the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Organization, with a 2-star leading that. But then as we move to the right, we come into the Space Operations Command, which is affectionately referred to as SPOC. And there will be a 3-star general overseeing that. And then the Space Systems Command, and then moving over to the far right, the Space Training and Readiness Command. Again, these elements, these field commands, have yet to be stood up with those general officers in place. Next slide, please. So again, touching upon the core roles that were transferred to the United States Space Force. We have the acquisitions and engineering professional, a cyberspace operator, intelligence professional, and a space operator. Next slide. So those are career fields that, no kidding, will become Space Force career fields. Some will only exist in the Space Force, such as the space operators, but some will be across in other services, such as the intelligence career field. So again, the Space Force then has the mandate to organize, train, and equip the forces for space. And as you see, the military service there under the Air Force. So initially, the Air Force Space Command fell under and was aligned with the United States Air Force. But on the December 20th of 2019 is when that command, in essence, went away and became the U.S. Space Force. So it really currently still kind of has more of a command structure, but it is transitioning to, no kidding, the Space Force structure with those field commands that will fall underneath. And then, if you're familiar with the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which established the combatant commands, which is the warfighting capability of all of the services as we seek to support the combatant commanders. And so you'll see, along with combatant commands such as the U.S. STRATCOM, is now the United States SPACOM, or U.S. SPACOM. Next slide, please. And so this shows you just a little bit about the United States Space Command organization, as again, that combatant command versus the military service, which is the U.S. Space Force, which does the organized, train, and equip. But the Space Command is the one that is the warfighting capability. Next slide, please. And then the U.S. Space Command is also intimately involved with partnerships around the globe, in essence, to strengthen the show of force for any of the other adversaries who would want to contest space if we're stronger together. And so these are a number of our allies and partners as we seek to secure the high ground that is space. Next slide, please. And so again, you may be familiar with the name Billy Mitchell, and probably even familiar with the name of General Schriever as well. But back in 1957, he was quoted to say, in the long haul, our safety as a nation may depend on our achieving space superiority. In several decades from now, the important battles may not be sea battles or air battles, but space battles. Well, basically, I'm here to tell you that decade has come, and having the high ground in space is critical for our space superiority. And you may know that the new model that was just released last week for the Space Force, Sempra Supra, always above, speaks to that we want our nation to continue to hold the high ground that is space. So we're here to ensure we achieve and maintain space superiority. Next slide. So this slide says questions, but we're going to hold off on questions till later. And I'm going to ask Chaplain Minor to go ahead and pull up the second portion of the briefing. And Chaplain Travis Yelton will then be the next speaker.
Okay, so on this slide, the big takeaway that I wanted to highlight is how the Space Command is separate from the Space Force. And as we're learning about the Space Force in detail during this presentation, that's one of the big things to keep in mind as you're looking at the slides. These are two different entities, and the Space Command is one of 11 unified combatant commands. And you can see those underneath the block of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it lists all of the unified combatant commands, and these are our warfighting commands. And the Space Force, you can see, is a service under the Department of the Air Force. And it's similar to the Marine Corps as a service under the Department of the Navy. So that's what I wanted to highlight here on this slide, just the distinct nature. There's two separate entities. When we talk about space things, sometimes the words Space Force and Space Command get mixed together, and it's as if it's one thing, but really they're two things, two separate things. And when we talk about the Space Force, that's the service side, and the Space Command is the Joint Force Unified Combatant Command side.
All right, you can go to the next slide. And this is Chaplain Sutter speaking again. So as of on Monday, this is the organizational structure. Again, it's falling under the Headquarters United States Space Force, but what you see in that square trapezoid there, the Headquarters US will become Headquarters SPOC, or Space Operations Command. But the Air Force bases that were previously known as Peterson Air Force Base and Schriever Air Force Base are now combined, and they're known as Peterson Schriever Garrison, and they are our Space Force assets. And then Buckley Air Force Base is now Buckley Garrison as well. Next slide. So under those, what's going to become Headquarters SPOC are now mission deltas. And then you can see the deltas that are listed there. So a lot of new naming, nomenclature in the space world with these mission deltas. And so starting on the far left is what's called the Star Delta, and that's has a P under it because it's provisional. That Star Delta is actually going to become the Space Training and Readiness Command that we mentioned previously, but it's starting off small, and then it's going to grow into that command. So then we have a Delta 2, which is focused on space domain awareness. Delta 3 is going to be focused on space electronic warfare. Delta 4, missile warning. Delta 5, command and control. Delta 6, cyberspace operations. Delta 7, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Delta 8, satellite communications and navigational warfare. And Delta 9, orbital warfare. So next slide. And just gives you a snapshot of how we're trying to posture the Chaplain Corps in support of the Space Force, because we will remain one of the career fields that's a supporting career field and not one that's organic to the Space Force. So we will continue to be Air Force chaplains who will serve in Space Force assignments. But in order, with this new construct and the standing up of the mission deltas and the garrisons and the field commands, we're assessing that we're going to need a few more people, but we've got to grow that. You can't just have it overnight. So this is just kind of the snapshot laydown of the picture of as our current manning, as well as the projected manning that we need. And these numbers are based on teams, religious support teams. So in our projected need there, when we say we want 33 religious support teams, that's a chaplain and a religious affairs airman. So a total of 66 people that we want to grow to versus the current that we have. All right, next slide. And now if there's time for any questions, we can take those, but I know you've got a full slate of presentations and briefings. But if Chaplain Minor fields any questions, we can work to try to answer those offline with follow-up.
Well,
and we have made, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, sir, for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, if you were going to say there is time for questions or not.
Absolutely, there's time for questions, but we have several moderators out there that have been gathering questions. So folks are kind of interested in what you have to say, sir, and I think there are questions to be had if you have the time for us.
Okay, certainly. Hopefully between Chaplain Yelton and myself, we can answer some of these questions.
Well, the first question I think most folks have is that we have an agreement in the Civil Air Patrol as your auxiliary to augment and support the United States Air Force and the Department of Defense. Would you all accept the Civil Air Patrol augmentee in one of your stations for as an opportunity to serve?
I would think that would be appropriate. Again, as long as we continue to remain aligned with the Air Force Chaplain Corps, I would see that any agreements and things like that exist would be transportable in support of space operations. But certainly I would need to bounce that off the office of the Chief of Chaplains just to make sure that I'm not getting ahead of anybody in the speaking. But I certainly would be open to any and all support, and that is perhaps one of the big questions right now concerning space is also, in addition to the Civil Air Patrol, but also the Air Reserve component, the Reserve Force, the Air National Guard, what role, they currently have space support missions. And so what are they going to kind of remain? Is there going to be a Space National Guard or things like that? So those are all questions that are out there that remain to be answered. So hopefully that's at least answered this question at hand.
And the last question, sir, is consistent with the Coast Guard and the Navy support of the Coast Guard. Will you be eventually transitioning to a Space Force uniform once they have one?
That's another question that levels higher than I have to answer. That is what we are recommending, is that when even our Air Force Chaplain Corps personnel, chaplains, and religious affairs airmen are serving in Space Force assignments, that we would wear the uniform commensurate with that force, similar to the Navy. When they support the Marines or the Coast Guard, they wear those uniforms. Currently, the utility uniform, the OCP, is common to both the Air Force and the Space Force. The name strips, however, do differ in color. The Air Force has the spice brown stitching, and the Space Force now has the dark blue or black stitching. And I'm not sure, again, what would happen if we would wear the stitching. The name strip would remain Air Force on our uniforms, but it could be in a different color stitching.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Chaplain Jeff Williams, who's been monitoring our Learning Management Center, where people are asking questions. Chaplain Williams?
The first question, in what ways do you see the Chaplain Corps in Space Force and Space Command differing from the Chaplain Corps in the Air Force and Civil Air Patrol? Are there different and unique challenges?
Well, again, we're trying to organize. So there's going to be a lot of commonalities. I think one of the things that we want to try to start it off the bat with is the embedded concept of chaplains and religious affairs airmen with units and commanders. And that's something the Air Force is also kind of growing into with the True North concept and billets there. But that would be kind of one of the organizing things that we would like to see start early on in the Space Force, is having chaplains and religious affairs airmen embedded at all the echelon levels. We'll still have the garrison entities, installations that will most likely have kind of the chapel and the parish ministry type of things. But in support of the mission deltas, we would want to have religious support teams there. Now, any special kind of skill sets, things like that for a chaplain course in support of the Space Force, it's going to be, I think, similar to the support we give to the employed in place or deployed in place. Like the manned, the remotely manned aircraft and things like that, where our operators do the mission from their home station base, and then they do their duty, do a mission, and then they go home immediately to their family without any separation. And that's going to be the way it will be for many of our space operators as well. That their stresses are going to be different than the stresses of those who deploy and go to another country away from family for longer periods of time, so to speak. But so that those are going to be some of the skill sets that we'll have to look at. How do we best support the operators in the Space Force based on what they're facing? I don't know if Chaplain Yelton has anything to add on this one or not.
Well, I just wanted to say a word about diversity and inclusion. And as we're building something new like the Space Command, those are some key constructs that we want to keep in the forefront of our minds when we're putting our teams together. And as leaders, we want to make sure that we recognize the importance of all people. And so as we're building the ethos, the ethic of the Space Command, those are some key ingredients. And every chance that I get to speak, I like to mention those.
Thank you. Another question. Given the areas of responsibility of the U.S. Space Force, will new officers and enlisted personnel be trained in similar ways to other military branches with ground combat, small weapons, etc., or will training be focused on developing a different kind of warfighter entirely?
That's a good question that I don't currently have the answer to. I think, again, for chaplains and religious affairs airmen, our training is going to be very similar to what the Air Force receives. And I would think much of that training is also going to be transportable to the Space Force as well. But as I was talking about the employed in place kind of versus overseas deployments, that in some ways does speak to that question or that wondering, are there different skill sets if we're not really leaving, CONUS to perform the missions of space? Do we really need to have some of that training that is necessary for an overseas deployment? But I just ask for your patience. Some of that, I think, waits to be seen, how this all plays out as the Space Force matures and grows. And again, as the warfighting supporting component command chaplain there, I'll yield some time to Chaplain Yelton if he's got any further to add to that.
I think you summarized that very well.
Another question has to do about accession of members of Space Force. Can people directly enlist in Space Force, or will it just be join the regular Air Force and then try to transfer into Space Force?
Yes, the plan is eventually for direct accessions, both officer and enlisted into the Space Force. Currently, the first wave is there were 2 career fields as of the 1st of May that had to make the decision because those were going to be organic to space. They were no longer going to reside in the Air Force. So those folks had to decide, do I want to transition into the Space Force and keep my current career field, or do I want to stay in the Air Force, and then would require me to have to cross-train into a whole different career field. And then now opportunities that have been given to career fields such as intelligence that are going to be utilized by both the Air Force and the Space Force, but some of the intelligence career fields are given the opportunity now to make the decision, do I want to do intelligence in the Space Force, or do I want to remain in the Air Force as an intelligence operator? And so the first wave is kind of focused on the Air Force and career fields that were space oriented, either organically or in support of space. But then there's going to be the career fields like us, chaplain corps, legal, medical, that are going to reside in the Air Force, but will then support the Space Force. Now, the next couple of waves, 2023 or so, the Army and the Navy will kind of go through a similar thing with the assets that are organic to space support in those services will be given the opportunity then to transfer into the Space Force or remain in their respective military services. And then once kind of all those rounds are done, and probably even concurrently, such as this last May, there were 86 graduates from the United States Air Force Academy who graduated into the Space Force. So they were among the first officers to join the Space Force. But so I think there's going to be these rounds of the existing capabilities that get transferred to the Space Force. But concurrent with that, I think they will try to open the pipeline as soon as possible to start bringing some folks directly into the Space Force as well. And again, the Space Force is going to be the organization that will assess people to organize, train, and equip. And then once they're all trained and equipped, they will be used in support of then the U.S. Space Command.
Thank you. I think it would probably be a good thing to ask Captain Parsons if she's got questions to toss to you as well.
Thank you, sir. All right. The first question, and really the one that keeps recurring, is how large is the current Space Force and how many chaplains are in that Space Force?
So, yeah, the size of the Space Force currently, in terms of when you think of transition to that career field or to the force itself, is roughly, I think, 500. But you still currently have a lot of the Air Force, Navy, Army individuals who are supporting the Space Force. As far as chaplain corps personnel, we currently have 28 chaplains who are serving assignments in support of the Space Force. And then we have 20 religious affairs airmen that are supporting. And we want to grow to have 33 each. And so have a parity of one chaplain and one religious affairs airman, working in concert to support the mission there in the Space Force. Now that's the Space Force. Chaplain Yelton has any number on the that reside in support of the command.
The command is even smaller right now, and a lot of the people who are now in the command were dual-hatted
You still with us?
and were Space Force and Space Command, but now, oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just talking about the dual-hatted nature of the individuals that were in the Space Command and how now that's starting to divide, and the Space Force is unique and the Space Command is separate. And so, but really the command doesn't have that many people. The Space Force is much bigger.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question that we're being asked is about the ranking system. Is this going to be like the Sea Services or like the Air Force system?
Good question. And just as of today, I read a news article that the recommendation coming out of Congress, House of Representatives, is that the rank structure would be Navy rank structure. That's not what the current rank structure is. So we'll have to just wait and see where this goes as far as the rank structure. Obviously, space has received a lot of support from Congress. And so our congressmen and women continue to provide oversight and inputs. And so the rank structure is one of those questions that has yet to be decided upon and answered. But so that's a very good question, because that's what it remains, is a question.
All right. And then we've had several requests, the slides or the video be available for us to share with our cadets or others who might be interested.
Absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, Chaplain Minor has the videos, the slides. The slide deck that contained the embedded video is a large file, so assuming it would just be a matter of the means and the ways of sharing these slides, but I have no problem with them being shared. It would just be the mechanics and logistics of it.
And I'll go ahead and then we'll go ahead and put those up there. Sir, we've kind of run to the end of our time with you, and other questions we will forward to you both, and I appreciate that. One last question for Chaplain Yelton, and that because you're dealing with war fighting at a distance, are there any specific chaplain issues that you see as you deal with war fighters having to I guess go home and have a normal life while trying to fight the war on the other side of the world?
That's a good question. Thank you for that. There's been quite a bit of research and study done on that type of thing, specifically with regard to PTSD and moral injury. And so those chaplains who are working with remotely piloted aircraft are really at the cutting edge of that type of ministry and care and understanding of what it does to a person, and that type of military mission, that type of warfighting combative mission. And so I would look to those who are working in the areas with like the MQ-9 Reaper and those types of platforms, and what are those chaplains in those areas doing to reach out. But I think, yes, there are some unique considerations to all of that, and perhaps more time can be spent later unpacking that. But the chaplains who are working already with those types of platforms would have good leads as far as books, resources, and videos on ways to spiritually care for these members and their families. Thanks. And thanks everybody for your service and your continued service in the Civil Air Patrol, and God bless you.
And we thank you so very much to both of you for taking the time to be with us. And one of the highly coveted and spiffy Civil Air Patrol Chaplain Corps coins will be on its way to both of you as our thank you. And we hope that you display them proudly from all of us. Again, it's been our real blessing to have you with us, and thank you so very much. Let's take a 5-minute quick break while we switch. Our next topic is going to be space ethics, brought to you by the world expert, I think, in space ethics, brought to us from around the world. And Chaplain Coleman will be speaking in 5 minutes. So 5 minutes in place, please.